Just give a moment for everybody to get up on stage. But how's everyone doing today? We still charged full of energy? It's been 10 hours, I think, we've been in this room. It's feeling good. Give yourselves an applause. So you got hard work. There's 2 more sessions. We're going to put on a good show for you. We have a great conversation. We're going to talk a little bit about the risk process. Construction is a risky business. Projects. Who's had a project go wrong at any point in the stage? Only 4 or 5 hands. We got a good room in here. All right. Well, I guess we're done. So I'm really excited to get this conversation going. We have 3 really great panelists and great stories to tell about how risk can kind of show its face from planning during project delivery and even after a serious event. I think there's a lot of things that we tend to have blind spots to. The big difference to me between risk and crises is risk is something you can control, crises are something you respond to. And as those crises occur, you're typically now learning about what you didn't have when that starts to happen. But my name's Nick Caravella. I'm an architect by trade. I work with Avicado Construction Technology Services, and we help owners use technology better to get that insight that they need to respond to those events, as well as prevent them from happening in the first place. But enough about me. I'd love to turn this over to the rest of our panel. And Hayden, if you'd like to take a minute to introduce yourself.
Hayden Collins. I'm the Director of Higher Education Services for Parsons. I work specifically with the University of California network throughout the state of California.
Thanks.
Yeah, good afternoon. Davies. I'm with Los Angeles Metro. I'm in their capital project program management. I do facilitate cost and schedule risk analysis on our capital programs.
Good afternoon, everyone. Michael Chee. I'm the Director of Public Affairs and Information Technology for the City of Montebello, but came with a lot of experience in this area, having been at iCAMP for the previous 5 years here in the Los Angeles area. And these seats are very reclining.
They are.
I was noticing that too.
This is all right.
If we're very calm, it's the chair. So, like as we jump in, I think something that was really interesting, and we've had a great opportunity to have conversations ahead of this panel and talk a little bit about what this means to each of us. And I'd really want to just kind of jump in, I think, with you first, Dave, to talk a little bit about the design process and what LA Metro is doing to help make sure that things are running the way and everybody has the information they need.
Okay, so the panel's discussing asset management, and when I first got asked to be on this panel, I'm thinking, that's not in my wheelhouse. I don't do asset management. I do not do O&M management. So discussing with the panel members, I said, really my where I'm coming from in terms of managing assets eventually in Los Angeles Metro is through the CapEx program and how we set up our capital program to ensure that we're delivering the asset that we can then manage and mitigate through the operational cycle. So I think this morning, if you're listening to Heather this morning, she was talking about Los Angeles Metro, how we're having to go back and do a lot of retrofitting of our existing systems for vulnerability, climate adaptation, asset management. We've had some horror stories, obviously, on some of our systems where our assets have failed or virtually failing and having to go back and fix them. So lessons learned from that are now coming back to our capital program where, we're recognizing that, again, we have to put an asset into operation that's robust enough to be operational for 20, 30 years. So in our world, it starts engineering and construction. Metro, like a lot of agencies, we have standard specifications, standard design criteria, which we apply to our projects. And the main reason for that is we want consistency across our program. If you've been in Los Angeles, we've got a lot of disparate lines that we then have to manage eventually. So getting that consistency across the design is imperative to us as well. I think Joey talked a little bit this morning about our quality program. We've got a very robust quality program in our capital projects. So that's also another way of ensuring that the asset is up to quality standards, and when we put it into operation, it will function as we need it. I think Patrick talked a little bit about once we've gone through that capital program and we've gone to revenue service, it's the handing over of the data, setting up the asset management system, and then how the asset management system will be used for maintenance, etc. That's where I get off the bus. That's where I stop. And, you know, some of the challenges we're having, you know, data is as good as the input to the data. So if you're not getting the correct data input, it's garbage in, garbage out. So that's something we have to really concentrate on, is that the quality of the data being inputted to those asset management systems are up to snuff. The other thing we're talking a little bit about in Metro is what we call collaborative delivery, which is CMGC, Progressive Design Build, P3s. How do we fold in when we have prescriptive design criteria? How do we fold in descriptive design criteria? So instead of having a prescriptive way of delivering the project, we give a description of what we want the project to do. How does that then fold into your asset management systems? So that's kind of my world. That's what I get up to.
And I think what's fascinating about the data problems, and it's stuff that we've seen in research, is around 95.5% of data currently goes unused in construction, which is, it's a large amount, but when we consider the fact that data has also tripled over the past 3 years, there's a mountain of information that we have to deal with. And handing that information over from pipeline to pipeline as these processes and new technology changes can create quite a bit of problems, but it does create a good opportunity, and I think that's where Hayden can kind of come in and talk about, surprise, can talk about the little bit of the accountability that's being created through the asset lifecycle.
Okay, shocker to everyone. When I spoke to people out in the audience, and so I'm going to do a little basic understanding statement here before we get started. There are things out there that you have to prove that have to be financed, and you have to convince the people that hold the money that you really need this and you need it financed. That's the key to everything, regardless of the software you have or the program you have. So let's do a little simple, basic explanation here. Before I get into this, everybody has a car. You have your car, that's a level 1. And in that car, you have a level 2 and a level 3 and a level 4 and a level 5. So let's talk about level 3 for a second. Level 3 are all 4 tires in that car. So most of the systems out there that have done FCAs for the past 20 and 30 years have all addressed level 3. And each and every one of you have sent out there and said, okay, we got to get facilities management money for our deferred maintenance. We're going to submit a level 3, and the bean accounting professionals will be up there and they'll say, hey, by the way, that's great, we'll fund it. And they'll give you a little bit of money for it, but they're perplexed because the following year you'll come back and ask for the same level 3 stuff because you didn't get everything replaced, and it's still deferred maintenance. Now figure we've done that for about 100 years now. They've caught on. They figured it out. You've been funding that building for 100 years, you've been giving us level 3 stuff, and it hasn't fallen apart yet. Oh my gosh. So here's your paradigm shift for all the programmers out there and everybody for the state that's ready to go. At level 5, I'm only addressing one of the tires. And since you're not going to get the $5 bazillion you ask for every time you go for deferred maintenance, I'm doing a surgical strike. And when I do my surgical strike, I'm only addressing the level 5 items you need. And you only need those items to be replaced between now and the next 3 years. Not the next 20 years, not the next 30 years of a life cycle. Surgical strike, immediate needs, immediate funds for 1 to 3 years. At level 5, you're creating an understanding with the individuals and the people in your chain of command all the way back up to the California General Assembly that if that representative runs for office again, he said, hey, look, I funded that, and they spent it on that pump that they said they were going to spend it on, and it got replaced. Now you can track how much your deferred maintenance was brought down, and you can go back to your boss and say, hey, look, not only did we do that, we did it correctly, and we spent the money where we said we were going to spend it. And we spent the amount of money we said we were going to spend, and it builds credibility in the system, and that's how you're going to get it funded. Now, it's not hidden information. You can go to the Regents Board. You can see what's going on with the University of California. When they first started this way back in, they were using everybody's program, funded level 3. They were getting a couple $1 million a year. With the iCAMP program, the first year they got $125 million. The next year they got $325 million. The next person was another $125 million. The next ask is $1.7 billion for all of their infrastructure done down to a level 5, and they're getting the funding over and over and over again because it's credible funding, it can be tracked, and it can be traced. That's the key to the game. And that's how you'll gain credibility in the system, and that's how you get funding for your systems to get replaced.
Well, and I think what's really fascinating about that and the story that is going to start to tell when we get over to you, Michael, is the knowledge that we can gain when we start to track those assets down to that asset level. We find many times with the clients that we support that they often don't know what's in their building. And coming from architecture, I know that that's how that happens. Design criteria doesn't match what's installed. Someone goes and then provides service and then changes something that's there. And then we get to our building and something happens, and what we think is installed is not what's installed, and now we have to react. And unfortunately, we had a tornado pass through the city of Montebello not too long ago. And Michael's been working through quite a bit of this and has been learning kind of the impacts of what happens when you do not have your assets in order. Would you like to share that story?
Yeah, sure. And it's not just what's inside the building, it's the building itself. It's what the building is made of. It's how the building is constructed. One of the great lessons we learned from our incident is that building owners, building operators, or the businesses within those buildings often don't even understand their own architecture, what could fail, what could go wrong, until literally the roof is ripped off the structure, and then you find all kinds of issues and problems. So yeah, if you didn't see the news, there was a EF1 tornado that hit the only western city in the United States, happened to be my city, Montebello. Fortunately or unfortunately, it struck in an industrial area in the southern part of our city, so it affected only major commercial business operations. It landed and struck about a quarter-mile path from its point of landing to its point of dissipation. Unfortunately, in that quarter-mile path were a lot of large industrial and commercial structures of all sorts and sizes, of all types of construction methodologies. And every weakness in every building was exposed. The first of which is nobody anticipated getting hit by a tornado ever. So the first lesson learned, looking back at the situation from where we stand now, is with regards to owner-operator insurance coverages. Because what a lot of people learned at the end of the day, a lot of these structures weren't even capable of surviving wind gusts or sustained wind events over 60 miles an hour. So an EF1 is rated by the National Weather Service somewhere, if I recall, 85 miles an hour to 115 miles an hour in cyclonic winds. Okay, because we're talking about a tornado. That's not just a big wind gust that may knock something over or break some windows. That was something that was unforeseen by anybody. There's only one company in the area that had sufficient coverage, sufficient insurance, and is going about rebuilding and recuperation 100% on their own, and that was Royal Paper Factory, which was one of the hardest hit, one of the largest employers in the area, and is probably one, if you saw the news at all, that you saw featured extensively, because you could see all their supplies and equipment right through the roof, and they were well prepared. So that was one lesson learned, right? Do you have the right kinds of insurance coverage for your operations to recover quickly? Second is knowing and understanding what kind of architecture and structure your building is made of. We had at least one report of somebody thinking they could get back to work quickly by throwing blue tarp over the exposed beams and just getting back to it. And of course, that's not going to work if you've been red tagged by the fire marshal. So knowing what kind of actual architectural structure you have, we had a lot of very old wood beam ceilings. Very lightweight roofing materials that had been in place in some cases over 50 years for a lot of these structures, and was simply just peeled back like paper in this particular event, large sections. a huge debris field. The debris field was defined by about 5 miles, even though the event itself was about a quarter mile in terms of impact zone. So there's that, understanding your building structure. The third major learning in terms of assets, I saw the gentleman right before I got in the room talking about your people. A large portion of damage and therefore the halo effect in terms of sustaining or restarting your operations is to your employees. There's a large mix of both documented and undocumented workers in this particular area. So you can imagine along comes with that a number of people who don't carry the right personal insurance for their own vehicles. And for many of those people, their vehicle is their only means of transportation. And scores, if not hundreds of people, lost their personal vehicles totaled due to the wind damage, the debris damage that their vehicles suffered. They were completely inoperable. They lost all their windows. Some were flipped over. Semi-trucks were flipped over. So understanding your employees' needs and coverage, and therefore the halo effect we're still dealing with is a lot of these employees can't return to work because they have no reliable transportation, and now they're dealing with their own mini financial crisis on a case-by-case basis. There's that. And I think I mentioned a fourth, Nick, did I? I'm blanking.
Yeah, I believe it was most primarily the insurance and understanding the assets, and I really like the tie back to people as well. It's been a common theme that's come up at the conference of making sure you take care of your people. I think we're always worried about our talent pipeline, but we also need to take care of the people who work for us, and I feel that that's oftentimes where innovation does occur at companies. And there we go.
Number 4.
Yep.
Working with your city leadership, understanding municipal codes. In the city of Montebello, we have our own fire department, we have our own police department, and of course we have our own public works department with building inspectors. Once the fire marshals go through, did the initial assessment, tagged buildings to one extent or another, the handoff then goes to the public works department. Very few of our business owner operators knew how to interact or intersect with the city when it came to getting the right permits for reconstruction, recovering from the damage, anything from touching materials that may have been toxic or exposed due to the damage. We had different regulatory agencies descend upon us, some of which we had never seen in action at this level before, one of which was AQMD. Interestingly, they were the first government agency on scene, and they were telling people not to touch debris because of the possible particulate matters that would be exposed. And I have never seen that happen. And I used to work for the AQMD, so I was shocked. So there were definitely some quirks, but understanding your city or local municipal governments, understanding the codes, and understanding who you should connect with is definitely a key learning for that.
You want to add?
So I'm looking forward to doing a risk assessment in your city, because the first thing they're going to put on any risk register now is tornado. And jokes aside, you know, it is one of these dilemmas in terms of looking at risk management. Is you know, how do you deal with it? So do you insure against it? Do you put money contingency against it? Or do you just accept it? And just the likelihood of a hurricane hitting us is like minimal. So like these businesses, they don't insure against that. And then they get hit. But then it's the impact of that is so devastating. So,
right.
You know, when you're looking at the asset is, you know, insuring against that asset and the failure of that asset and how you deal with that. So in our world, obviously, it's you know, the preventative maintenance budgets or the state of good repair budgets, how you set them aside and how you protect those budgets so as when we do have to go in and maintain the asset, the funding is available, it's not taken away from us to go and fund something else. So I think that's a dilemma for agency as well, is balancing those budgets and making sure that those funds are available for the state of good repairs.
And I think critical to that is, at least from what I've seen so far, is a business continuity plan, right?
Yeah.
You may not want to buy the insurance, but then you should build into your continuity plan, okay, so if the roof gets ripped off our building, what do we do?
Exactly.
What's our fallback plan?
Yeah.
If you want to go down that route.
Yeah. But again, like
One tornado, right?
Tornado.
I live in Tornado Alley. I'm a Southern boy. Let me tell you about hurricanes. Let me tell you about tornadoes. Let's talk about FEMA, GEMA, and funding. Let's bring it to the fire right here. Fellas, I'm telling you right now, I'll let every one of you know, get with your LEPCs. Get with each and every one of your community LEPCs. Start holding these meetings he's talking about. The only way your facilities are going to find a general protection, especially when it comes if you have toxic chemicals in the area. One of our hurricanes that hit down there, and it wasn't awful. When we got down in Savannah, there was a toxic waste plant right there, and it rolled right up into the residential area. The LEPC came in, fire department, police department, GEMA followed up. All of our guard guys were standing around, and not one person got contaminated, and it got cleaned up, and everybody was happy. Preparation is fantastic. Yeah. Don't find yourself on the emergency scale, on the pay scale. I'll back them up, but that's just one tornado. You can catch up. Come on.
Well, the previous one was 40 years ago. Was that when I was looking?
So it was interesting. The media kept asking me, do you ever remember a tornado? And I happened to remember the only one that hit near here in downtown LA. And I don't think at the time it was classified as a tornado. It was just a strong wind event, but it did damage the convention center.
Okay. Well, and it's fascinating growing up on the East Coast and dealing with Sandy. I was out of power for 14 days, and I was happy to go to work because that was the only place I could get electricity. And so hearing the story and hearing how these things have been actually happening, it seems more frequent. I don't know if it's the news and just our access to knowledge, but it does seem that we're getting storms, and I'm curious how this is impacting your approaches to resiliency as well in your projects.
Wow, that's good. Where you're hitting decarbonization. I'm sorry. You're hitting decarbonization, and see, there's all kinds of requirements. So I know that shovel-ready decarbonization, energy efficiency. Are you using natural gas? Whatever that source is going to impact that cost on it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, I mean, Heather kind of talked about it this morning, and that is recognizing the climate change and recognizing that some of the assets that we have in place aren't robust enough for those climate changes. I mean, she talked about Catenary that's melting in the sun because of the heat. So if you look at Los Angeles, it's microclimates across Los Angeles. And the weather in Long Beach is totally different to the weather in the San Fernando Valley. So we're building in these different, so you can't just take what you're using in Long Beach and then just put it across in San Fernando Valley. So that's a way of protecting your asset as well, is building it for that. We have a river. It is a river. It is designated a river, by the way.
It's officially been a river for the last 4 months. Yeah,
officially a river. You can canoe down it. But jokes aside, sometimes that drainage channel gets pretty full sometimes, and it's more of an occurrence, and flooding on the lines and things like this, and having to look at potentially raising them up so they're out of these floodplains. Instead of designing for a 50-year flood, you're now designing for the 100-year flood. These are the sort of things that we're having to start to look at in our capital projects.
I was hoping you'd call me out on this. I forgot about this. When I said LEPC, by the way, that's Local Emergency Planning Committee. Forgive me for that.
Goes by different names, but same concept.
Same
yeah.
concept.
Planning department, seek them out.
Yeah. Well, I know we're coming up to the end of our time. Is there anything either of you would like to add in terms of what you've learned, especially dealing with the emergency situation, or through our conversation today, that you think might think differently about how we manage our assets moving forward?
Well, there's 1,000 rules and regulations for every business to follow, regardless of where they're located, right? Especially here in Los Angeles. But I would say that the simplest thing that I've observed and we're seeing play out in real time for a lot, if you had to imagine your business having to pick up and move in one day, what's your plan look like to do that? Because that's what a lot of these businesses have been thinking about. They're still doing it right now, some of the larger operations, but some, we sadly lost 2 employers. We sadly had one issue a warn letter just last week, laid off all their employees, and decided not to return, not to come back, which is not good for the city, and it's not good for revenue. But part of business continuity is an imagining the worst case scenario, and if I had to literally move my operations and every asset concerned with those operations, be that people, be that material, be that whatever, equipment, what would I do? Where would I go? Because we did have at least one business that wanted to stay operational, that could stay operational, but they couldn't find the right space. So they had no fallback area to relocate to. So,
Yeah, and business continuity is something we are looking at, obviously. You know, we talked about the availability of power. We use overhead catenary and electric system. So if the power goes out, you know, train could be stranded between stations. So, you know, some of the business continuity is looking at the asset and saying, well, should we put some battery backup, at least at the station, that you can pull the train back under some form of power to at least get the passengers to the station to offload them instead of leaving them stranded between stations. So, you know, we are looking at those types of business continuity in our organization.
The best recommendation I can give based on the experience, I'm also a guardsman, so I work with the Georgia Guard for hurricane response. So I work directly with GEMA and FEMA on the hurricanes, also the fires. Every business that we've worked with when they declared the county a disaster area or the state area a disaster area by counties, is you take every photograph you have of your business, every piece of equipment, every photograph, you log it in, you do, I'm going to do a sales pitch, but it's not a sales pitch, do a facility condition assessment at least once every 5 years, and your last set of photographs is your proof of existence. Your last photo is showing that, yes, this is a good condition. I didn't roll back the mileage on my 1957 Chevy to 10,000 miles and sell it to you. Yes, this actually existed. So photographs are important. Your written assessments are important. Your ability to track that information off-site so it doesn't get destroyed with your building is monumental.
Well, I want to take the time to thank you all for your contributions in this discussion. For those of you who are tuning in on the video, make sure you feel free to comment and interact with that and share it with your friends. But with the minute that we have left, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask the panel? Yeah, I'm actually quite surprised.
Yeah, really. Boy, we can get long-winded.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll return the time back to you then. And thank you very much for your time today.